Okay.
Hoşçakalın.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and salamat petang. Good evening or good afternoon, everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to the fourth or fifth lecture of publication series scheme. Today, we are going to have a talk regard to how to develop, present, and extend your soft computing model. Our speaker today is Dr. Hussein bin Sama. Dr. Hussein, as a brief, Dr. Hussein received his bachelor degree in computer engineering from Yarmouk University, Jordan, 2006. And master degree in computer engineering from Jordan University of Science and Technology, 2009. And also the PhD he received it from University Science, Malaysia, in 2016. His PhD degree in computer vision and machine learning. His current research interest in computer vision, deep learning, swarm intelligence, and soft biometrics. Dr. Hussein is a member of IEEE Computational Intelligence Society, and he has served as a reviewer for several well-known international journals, such as Machine Vision and Applications. Besides, he has published several high impact factor journals, papers in high-ranked journals, and he was the leader of two deep learning-based research projects. Before joining to UTM, Dr. Hussein was worked as an assistant professor in University of Aden, Yemen, and he was a senior lecturer at the University of Science, University Science, Malaysia, USM, before joining UTM. So let us welcome Dr. Hussein for the speak today, and
Okay.
you can share your slides.
All right. Okay, so now you can see my slides here, Dr. Fuad.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Fuad, for your kind introduction. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Very good afternoon, all audience joining here. This is Dr. Hussein from the Soft Computing Research Group, School of Computing, UTM. In this presentation, basically, I'm going to share with you my personal experience in publication. Sorry. So basically, this experience is related to my journey during the publication process. Of course, this journey was just a little, but when I look back to what I have achieved, which still is just a little, but I have found there is some kind of process or pattern or steps that I'm going to share with you, some tips and recommendations that you can take it in order to save your time and process during, especially if you are focusing on soft computing models. So in the context of this presentation, I'd like to highlight three terms. Basically, the first one is related to the development process. Usually, when we start to present our model, before we start the presentation, you have to go through the development process. And then once you have finished the development process, you need to move to the presentation stage, which is about how you can present your findings to be published in whatever high impact or low impact journals. It is the presentation step that you have to conduct. Finally, once you have published your work, there is another a chance for you in order to do more on your model, in order to extend it, reuse it, and so on. So here, I'll share with you my personal experience in these matters. Without any further ado, let us move on to the slides and jump here. So basically here, this is the main points that this presentation will try to cover. This presentation is quite short, but I'm trying to highlight my experience in this presentation. So in order to give you the big picture about this presentation, let us talk about these 6 points that will be covered in brief. Later, we'll discuss in details. First, at the beginning, I'm assuming here that you are looking for soft computing models in order to enhance, to hybridize, whatever, but at the end of the day, soft computing model will be the main contribution of your work here. So the first step, you have to choose what kind of soft computing model that will be used in your research. Of course, it's based on your problem that you are conducting there. After that, once you have identified what kind of soft computing models that you are going to use, you have to move to the second step, which is very important here. You have to implement these models. Of course, these models already exist in the literature, and you need to conduct a comprehensive comparative study between these existing models in order to figure out and highlight what's the weaknesses, the advantages, disadvantages of these models. So starting the implementation as soon as possible is a crucial step here, because I'm expecting that you are experimental, your area will be experimentally. So once you have conducted these kind of implementations, we come to the most fundamental question here, which is about what did you figure out? This is very important for you in order to define precisely where is your direction. So based on this comparative study conducted at step 2, you have to figure out what's the pattern, what's the trend, and where you are going in the next step. Once your direction is clear, then you have to move to the development steps shown here. So basically, I'm assuming at this stage you already established the baseline models. You have all the benchmarks that you need to start to develop your model. So you will go through the process of model development, which is time-consuming process. You will never expect that your simple idea can, from the first time you just plug in and you expect significant results. It's a process you have tried many times until your outcomes has been recognized to be published in whatever journals. Once you have finished the development steps, we will move to the presentation, which is very a critical step. Most likely, we can pass the development steps, but we fail at the presentation step. A presentation is meaning that you need to sell your finding. You need to present it in an academic way to be attractive for the readers and reviewers as well. Once this finished, and assuming that you already published your work, finally we have some tips and recommendations that you can apply in order to extend further extension you can do for your model, and maybe you can reuse it as it is to be applied for another application. So basically, we'll go through all these steps in this presentation. Again, the first step is choosing a soft model. So basically, if we look at existing soft computing methods in the literature, we have a lot, but here I'm trying to classify them based on the existence of the data. So here, if we assume that we have the data and the label, so we are talking about supervised learning. We have the data plus the labels. But in case if you have the data and these data are not labeled, so we are talking about the category of unsupervised learning. In the third category here, if we don't have the data, also our model is different. We are talking about reinforcement learning that will learn from the action in the environment. So we have some kind of state, actions, rewards, policies, and so on. So looking back at the first category here, under the supervised learning, we have basically two main categories. I know you're already familiar with these kind of models. I'm just here try to recap and establish some kind of foundations in order to go further later. So here, if we look at the under the supervised models, soft computing models, we have two different categories, which are classification models. So basically, the main differences is about the label. If your label is some kind of discrete values, you have some kind of labels for categories. So we are talking about classification. But in case your label comes as a continuous numbers, so we are talking about regression here. So under the classification models here, we are here talking about the most commonly used classification models. We have artificial neural network, which is the oldest one. We have support vector machine, and recently we have convolution neural network. Of course, there are others, many, and just here I'm presenting some examples only. So in terms of applications of these classification models, we have different applications that could be investigated here. We have email spam detection, we have speech recognition, image classification, all these kind of examples. It comes under the umbrella of classification problems. In terms of regression, we have a lot, of course, in the literature, but just here we try to highlight the most commonly used. So we have linear regression is the basic regressor used for regression problems. We have long short-term memory. Also, this model could be used as a classification. We have support vector machine, which comes as a regressor and at the same time as a classifier, and so on. I'm just here try to give some examples of each category here. In terms of application here, when we are talking about regression, we are talking about problems like stock market prediction, rainfall prediction, and so on. It's continuous output. This is the key for regression problems. If we come here to the second category of unsupervised models, we have basically three categories. Of course, sometimes you have another category here, which is semi-supervised learning, but here we'll try to highlight the most and the basic categories here. So under unsupervised learning models here, we have a clustering, we have dimensionality reduction, we have association analysis, and so on. So the key idea here, we don't have the label. We just try to manipulate the data without guidance. So you can see here for the clustering, we'll try to cluster this data without any guidance. So here we have several algorithms that could be used for clustering. The most popular one, key mean, fuzzy c-mean, expectation maximization, and so on. Under this category, we have different applications such as fake news identification, document analysis. So the label is not there. This is the key idea here. Under the second category, this is dimensionality reduction. Sometimes it could be classified as a different category, but here I am putting it here under the unsupervised because the label is not there. So here I'm talking about dimensionality or feature extraction, feature selection technique that could be executed without using the label. So here we have the most commonly used is principal component analysis is the oldest one, and it's still until now applied in different applications. Recently, we have encoders, decoders that just recently developed, which is related to deep learning techniques. So basically, all these models will work directly without labels. As an application of these kind of problems, the most common application is dimensionality reduction of bioinformatic data for DNA, RNA, and so on. The last category of unsupervised learning here, we have several models, but here we are talking about the problem of finding the relations between these unlabeled data. So here we are talking about, for instance, market basket analysis, sequence mining, and so on. So you will try to figure out the relations between these kind of data. The last category here is different from supervised and unsupervised. We don't have the data, and the model will be built incrementally based on the actions. So you have to put these kind of models in actions in order to apply different actions and see the rewards toward finding the best policy. So we have model free. We don't have any idea about the environment, so we'll start to interact with this environment, and the model will be built incrementally. We have Q-learning algorithm. We have recently deep Q-learning algorithm, which are fall in this category. As an application of these kind of models, we have self-driving cars. Sometimes you can use a combination of these kind of models to solve your problems, but here I'm trying to make them separate here. So we have a model based in case we can create a model based on some kind of statistics. So we have here an example Markov decision process. So the model has to be built, then could be applied to the problem. We have here as an example of model-based applications, we have industry process automation control and so on. Of course, there are many models there, just to try to highlight the most commonly used. So once you have figured out your model based on your problem, you know now what kind of model that you need to use in your approach. We move to the experimental part. So basically here, I'm expecting that we'll move to the step of implementing of existing model to conduct such a comparative study to find the weaknesses and advantages of each model. So here we have an example of experimental paper, which just recently published in pattern analysis and machine intelligence journal in this year. So looking at the title of this paper, here you can see they are talking about the problem of image segmentation. So main segmentation, you have to select the appropriate model that will be applied for these kind of problems. And here they are highlighting that they will cover all kind of deep learning models that will be used for that already used in the literature for the problem of image segmentation. So basically, if you look at the abstract of this paper, you have to answer three fundamental questions. The first one, why should we be interested in these kind of research. So the reader here must, the author here must highlight the motivations of conducting this kind of study, because from the first time it seems that the problem of image segmentation is already old problem and there is nothing new, but the author here should highlight what's the motivation behind this study. So if we look here, I don't know if you can see this text, but basically the author tried to highlight different applications that image segmentation is the main step. So we have augmented reality, we have robotic perception, and so on. Secondly, the second part of the abstract of this kind of experimental review paper, the author should precisely highlight his objective, what he is going to do exactly. So you can see here the author trying to say that he will provide a comprehensive review paper. Of course, this kind of study should be unique. It doesn't make sense that you will repeat the same review papers already done by others. It should be unique. So here, the last step about the uniqueness of the study here, you should answer the question why this work is different. It should be crystal clear. Otherwise, if there is duplication of knowledge, it doesn't make sense to waste your time to try to do the same review papers that already others did before. So all it's about the addition to the body of the knowledge. So if all these three questions clearly answered and clearly for you, you can go through and move to the second step, which is the implementation. Right, so next, after all these points highlighted clearly, we will move to the internal structure of this kind of experimental review paper. We have the same case study previously mentioned. So here, if we break down this experimental study into the basic component, we can see we should start with introduction, which any paper should start with. But at the end of the introduction, we should highlight clearly what's new, what's the novelty of this experimental study or review paper. It should be clear for the reviewer, for the editor, also for the authors, for the audience, I mean, in the research community. After that, the second section in this experimental paper, you should highlight the architecture. You should overview the architecture of these deep learning models that already published in the literature in terms of architecture. So here you just give a brief overview about the architecture of these kind of models. So here we can see that this is the architecture of CNN. Of course, one important point here, you have to be aware about it. You have to give credit for those already use this architecture. So it's not your model, it's the model of others. So you have to cite in your paper. After that, we'll move deeper into the more details about how deep learning models have been utilized in the literature to handle the problem of image segmentation. So we can see here, we are moving deeper, and here the author will try to highlight some studies already published in the literature. We have example of the studies, so we can see here we have encoders, decoders that have been applied for the problem of image segmentation. Finally, once all existing models in the literature have been cited correctly, you have criticized them, you have categorized them, because this is the most essential part of the review paper. You have to criticize existing work in academic manner. Otherwise, summarizing existing work is not enough. So you have to criticize, and your opinion and voice must be clearly mentioned. After that, after reviewing all existing models used for image segmentation, we move to the benchmark that have been used to do the evaluation and assessment of these kind of models. So here we are talking about public benchmark problems that have been used among all these conducted studies. Of course, you have to mention the performance measure. Then you have to present and report existing the reported results in the literature. So here the author just write up what each model already achieved in the literature. So from here you can see in terms of accuracy, in terms of performances, you can see which model is better in terms of accuracy, but accuracy is not all. Maybe the architecture, they have proposed simple architecture here, is complicated architecture. So there are many measures you have to consider in order to compare these kind of models. So now once you review all existing models, you have to move to the most fundamental question, which is about what did you figure out? You have to be clear about this. What's your finding now? What do you see? Where is the trend? What's the pattern? What's the weaknesses of existing techniques that are already published in the literature? So we can see here we have the last section of experimental review paper, which is about the challenges and the future work. So this should be clear for you. From this point, you must know what's the next step that you need to be conducted. So here, if we look at what the author of this paper is saying here, so he's expecting that to advance to the next level of performance, we must do some kind of integration between deep learning models with the classical models, but it's just the opinion of the author. Maybe during your study, you will see different gaps, you'll see different directions. It's based in your analysis. Here, maybe someone will claim these deep models comes as a black box, and it's quite difficult to modify them, to extend them, to integrate them with other models. So in order to highlight this point more, let us go further here and try to look inside this paper here. I'll try to highlight some points here. So this is the whole paper that we already discussed here. We have the introduction, review of existing models. So if you look here, you can see most of the conducted study in the literature, they are trying to modify these kind of deep learning models from inside. So they are proposing new architecture, they are proposing the embedding new techniques and so on. So here, I'll try to highlight this point here. If you look here, I'll try to maximize. So here we see this is just encoder decoders used for image segmentation. So just the basic encoder decoder used for performing image segmentation. So it's just as it is without any modification. So this paper is just a conference paper which has been published in, if I'm not mistaken, 2015. I see the reference here. So you can see from the references 41 here. So this is the reference of this paper. So you see here, this is just a conference paper. They have used the encoder decoder to make the segmentation. So it's in 2015. But if you look after what other researchers suggest and improve or suggest some ideas here, we return back to the model here. So you see here, there is another researcher come after this study, and he is proposing the same encoder-decoder technique, but here, if you look at the architecture, you can see here they are proposing basically in terms of architecture. I'm sorry. Basically, in terms of architecture, so it somehow the same architecture of encoders, decoders, but here the author tried to introduce some kind of links between the encoding step and the decoding step. So there is some kind of sharing of information between these steps. So here, if you see here, what's the novelty of this work? So basically, the main novelty of this work is the sharing of polling indices. So he's just passing some parameters here in order to enhance the results. So now, if you look at this idea, maybe you think it's just simple ideas that nothing major change on the in terms of architecture. You just pass some indices in order to enhance the results. But if you look at where this paper has been published, so you can see here, this is the reference of this paper, 25th. So maybe you think it's just a simple idea, but here my point, if you look at the reference that where this paper has been published in 25th here, so you can see this paper has been published in 2017, so 2 years later, but it has been published in the most, it's in the highest journal in the field of computer vision and pattern recognition. So when it comes to modification and contribution, don't think you need to create some kind of models from scratch. You have to think about existing models and try to improve them. But of course, all the kind of modifications here comes from inside. If you have example here, just to highlight this idea more, we have another example here. So you can see here, this is still the encoder decoder, but here the author tried to change the internal architecture to be like a U shape. So there is some kind of modifications from inside the model. So this is U shape. Another researcher comes after and they suggest there is different architecture could be investigated and could be proposed, which is the V shape. So you look here, all these kind of improvements comes from inside the model. It's not from outside. If you look at these kind of models as a black box and you just combine them as a black box, you take the output of the first one and the second one. Whatever you do from outside is not a major contribution. You have to look from inside. So a good news about how to start modify these kind of models from inside. We have here a link that you can utilize in your research. So opening this link here. So here, this website is very useful for you as starting point in order to use the source code of others. So here, for instance, assuming that I'm interested in the problem of semantic segmentation. So I'm key in here. I'm looking for semantic segmentation. So semantic segmentation problem has been investigated a lot in the literature. Just you key in your keywords and do the search. You can see in this website, the best part of this website, it will give you a brief summary about the paper. So here we have this kind of paper here. We have a summary, we have the proposed model, and we have the results here. So this will give you a brief summary about the paper. Some of them already shared their link, so you have to go through all of them here. So for instance, here in this paper here in 2020, they already shared the link with you. So you can go here and try to download the link. And so from here, it's a good starting point to start from what others already achieved. Don't start from scratch. You have to try to find your baseline models or your main models that you are going to improve and compare with at later. So it's good starting point for you to look for all these kind of existing codes and models and so on to perform your study. For instance, if you are interested in deep learning for medical image segmentation, so here we are key in. I am looking for deep learning for medical image segmentation. So we look for here all existing approach. So it's still looking. So you see here, we'll give you a quick review about what's have been conducted and results, the figures, and so on. So you have to look for the availability of the source code. So you have to go through them and to find if there is already exist code that you can start from. All right, you have to go through all of them until you find. So for instance, here we have the source code of this paper, which just recently published here. So you have to go in this link and try to download. Of course, you can see here most of recent work nowadays, the trend goes for using Python as the main code of implementing these kind of models. So here also you can try to contact the author of if he's willing to share his code with you. So I believe this website will be useful for you as starting point to try to find some existing work that you can start from. All right, we come back to our presentation here. So now, once sorry, I'm looking for a pointer here. So now, once you know what's your next step, what you are going to do, are you going to modify existing models? Are you going to combine different models together? We have here the map. In fact, in the literature, there are existing different levels of models modification. So the highest level is to introduce a new model. So these new models will usually be recognized as a cutting edge model or state of the art models and so on. So this is the highest level. The most difficult one is to introduce a new soft computing model. After that, in the second level, it comes to the modification of existing model. You don't want to introduce a new model, you just want to improve and modify existing models. So this is the second level. The third level comes after, which is the integration of different kind of models together, and you will put them together as a single model. At the lowest level here, sometimes you are not care about modifications or enhancement or hybridizing these kind of soft models together. We just look for the application of these existing models. So we just apply the model and use it as it is. So this is the lowest level in terms of what kind of model that you are going to present. So here we have example about the first one. We can see here Resonant Model is the most popular pre-trained deep learning model that was published by a research team from Microsoft. You can see this is a breakthrough model because at that time, 5 years ago, they have published this model. This is breakthrough. It's new. It's cutting edge model because last time they was facing a problem of increasing the depth of deep learning models. So you can see here the main problem that they already solved here in this paper. They are facing the problem of adding more layers, when you add more layers to deep learning models, there is a drop in the accuracy in both the training and testing phase. As you can see here, a model with 20 layers is much better than deeper models that comes with 56. So this is the barrier that was facing a researcher, but here they come with a creative idea that they can break through this bottleneck and they can increase the depth of these kind of models up to 152. So you can see they are increasing up to 8x. So it's breakthrough. So that's why it's very popular. It's used a lot by other researchers. And if you look here at how many citations this paper was able to achieve, it's very huge, more than 83,000 citations, because it's cutting edge and it's generic. It's used in different applications. That's why these state-of-the-art models will get the highest citation. So the most interesting part about this paper, it's just published as a conference, but of course, this is the most difficult conference in the field of computer vision and pattern recognition. It's tough to publish in this conference. So this is the highest level to introduce a new idea as a breakthrough. The second level here, I'm sharing my paper that I have did during my PhD study. So basically, in that paper, I have proposed some kind of modifications for particle swarm optimization. So this model comes at the category of modified model. So I'm not introducing a new model. I'm just try to improve existing models by incorporating the idea of reinforcement learning inside particle swarm optimization. So this is the second level of soft computing models that were discussed in the literature. The third level is the integration of different kind of soft computing models. But here you have to be aware about the hybridizing of different soft models together. Here we are talking about integration in a unique way. It doesn't make sense that if you try to execute the first model for some iterations and then move to the second model, go and back and forth. This is not a hybrid. This is not integration. Integration meaning that you have to look from inside these models and you try to connect them in a creative way to make this some kind of switching to be automatic and adaptive without giving a pre-defined iteration. So here we are talking about hybridization, meaning that you have to look from inside the model. Of course, when you go down, now you will focus more about the application. It's not enough to propose hybrid models without application. So your work must be augmented with application. The lowest level of deep learning models, not deep learning, soft models, is to use these existing models as it is. So if you look at the title of our paper here, we just utilize faster RCNN as it is, and we apply it for the problem of human detection from drone images. If you look at the title, it sounds attractive, but in terms of contribution or modification is nothing. We just apply the model as it is. So if you see here, what's the contribution of this paper here? We just try to investigate the application of faster RCNN for the problem of pedestrian detection. At the same time here, we are introducing a new data set. So here, all this data collected by us. But here, when we are talking about the data, it's not enough to just collect the data and use other models as it is. You have to propose something new, because applying as it is just application. Otherwise, you have to collect unique data. If your contribution comes from the data, so there is a specific protocol you have to follow in order to collect these data and make it available for researchers to use it. Otherwise, there is no contribution. So if you look at this paper, I'll try to show you what we have done. This is paper unluckily cannot reach the level of Q1 and Q2 because it lacks of contribution. So if you look inside this paper here, sorry, if we try to look inside this paper, you see here, we are doing here data collection. We have a labeling later here. So this is the model that we are proposing. Sorry, we have some technical. I think we have some. By the way, we are performing here data collection, but it's not enough for you to claim this is something new. You have to apply existing models for a new data because this data still is not on the level of to make it benchmark for others to use it. If you can make it as a benchmark, then we can say there is some kind of contribution to the research community. Otherwise, it's still application. All right, I hope it's clear for you. And now I move to the most important part of this talk, which is about the process that you need to conduct in order to develop your model. Basically, when you think the first time that the first idea, we just plug in this idea and we get the result. But in reality, the case, you have to refine it, modify it, and even maybe you have to change it. So this is basically, this is the process. You have to go through it. It's time-consuming process. That's why you have to start from the beginning to collect the required benchmarks, to try different model and try to figure out where is the possible rooms for improvement, the weaknesses, and so on. Because here we are talking about the experimental part. So if you can see here, it is a process. It takes time, and you have to focus on your problem. You have to be creative in proposing the idea. You have to find the pain point of the model. You have to figure out which parameters that have more influence than others. So it's a process and it's time consuming. There is no shortcut. There is no way just you implement your idea will get the result. It's time consuming process. You have to go through it many times until you have an outcomes that can be recognized to be published and to be recognized as a major contribution. All right, after you finish this process, it's time consuming. We comes to the presentation. So how you can convert this code to be readable by to be presented in an academic way. So basically, here we are talking about the algorithms, about the flow chart, about the figures and whatever. So here, this is very important for you. You have to be creative in presenting your models. You convert from the coding to make it readable for the readers, to be clear. But unluckily, here we are trying to just use the standard technique. We just try to write the pseudocode, the figures, and that's it. This is not enough. That's what happened with me in the first time. So the authors, the reviewers asked me to revise it, to extend it, to make it more readable. So you see here in the methodology part, I'm including some numerical examples to illustrate how this work, this idea could be implemented. So here, if you look at the methodology part of this paper, this is my paper, I just want to highlight for you figures and flow chart is not enough. You have to give more details about your work. So if you look here about the proposed approach, when we are talking about the details, starting from here, So we have around 5 pages. We have a lot of figures that we are trying to explain how this kind of integration between reinforcement learning with particle swarm optimization, how it could be done. So you see here, we have a lot of figures. Just we try to explain to convince the reviewers that this model could be work in that way. So you have here some numerical examples, all this about presenting your model. So never expect that you just give pseudocode and flowchart and simple figure. It's not enough. You have to give more details for the reviewers to convince them about your. So up to here, all about presenting the model. So all these figures here, we are trying to highlight the steps, what's going on exactly. They will not ask you to give them the code. They just ask you how to present the steps in a manner that anyone can reproduce these steps. So reproducibility here is a key. All right, so here about the presentation is not enough to present just flowchart and simple steps. You have to give more details. Even you have to include some numerical examples to illustrate your idea. Once you have finished this presentation and your work is already published, so also here, once you try to touch some kind of parameters on the model that you are trying to modify, here you are automatically invite a question about the influence of these parameters. What's the effect? For instance, assuming that you are proposing different steps to improve such a soft model. So now automatically you are inviting yourself to investigate the influence of each step individually. So you see here, we are trying to highlight the influence of each parameter individually. So you have to be aware about the experimental part. You have to check all these steps. You have to do the experiment for each contribution you have incorporated in your proposed approach. All right, so now once you have finished and successfully you published your work, there is another chance for you to go further and extend your work, because now you are very familiar with work. You understand all the details inside. So there is a high chance for you to extend your work. So you see here, I am sharing my personal experience that once we have finished this model, this is the first publication for us, we just add another level, another stage here. So we make it 3 levels. But here, of course, we are customizing this model to be used only for specific application. It's not generic. This one here is quite generic. So this generic model can be used for any application. But here, this customized model. But most likely, it's extension for the original one. So the key idea here, once you have your model, there is a high chance, high opportunity for you to extend your model. Also, another idea here I'd like to share with you, based on my personal experiments, there is a high chance for you to reuse your model as it is for different applications. But of course, the contribution will be less because this model is already published. There is nothing new, even it's your model. But just you will try to apply it for different application, as can be seen here in our paper. We are trying to use this is our first model. We are trying to use it in order to uh, do some kind of training of two-stage model. So this is another idea for you to reuse your model. The last slide here is about the same idea, reusing your model, but here I'd like to highlight the point that once you apply different technique or idea for model A, there is a high chance to apply this modification or technique for algorithm B, as can be seen here. we are trying to apply the same technique, Q-learning technique or reinforcement learning technique for the problem of simulated annealing. So you can see here, it's our idea. We apply it again as an idea. This technique will be incorporated in different models to improve it. But the best part here, a good news for you, it's not necessary to use your own model. You can use others' ideas and others' model, as can be seen here in this paper. They are just using the model that we have proposed here. So you can see they are citing our paper, and they have mentioned that they will utilize this idea for the problem of differential evaluation optimization problem. So here, the good news that you can adapt and utilize the idea of others to make it fit for your problem. I think this is the end. I hope these slides are useful for you. Thank you very much for your listening and patience. And now I move the floor for Dr. Fuad.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hassan, for this informative and well